Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're starting our dive into Detroit Become Human by following Kara's story. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Detroit Become Human originally released on May 25, 2018, with mostly positive reviews to follow. The game puts you in the shoes of three protagonists over the course of several days in November of 2038 and allows a ton of choice in the way the story plays out. Starting today and over the next few weeks in the Philosophy and Ethics series, we're going to be picking apart the story and examining the impact your choices have, not just in the game, but also in the real world. The footage I'm using and the perspective I'm taking comes mostly from my very first ever playthrough of the game, though there will be a few instances where we discuss a few variations in the story as well. Often, the world we live in can feel overwhelming, with things like war, poverty, famine, and disease making it seem like nothing we do can improve the situation we find ourselves in. Turning on the news at night, scrolling through your social media feed, or even just trying to have a conversation with your friends and family can make any hope for the future of our world seem bleak, to say the least. But our actions do make a difference, often in ways we don't even fully understand. The things we do on an individual level can have a profound impact on people we don't even know, and we each have the potential to shine a light in the darkness and bring someone back from the brink. As we talk about Detroit Become Human, we'll explore different levels of impact we can have, and hopefully, when all is said and done, the world will feel just a little bit brighter. We'll start with the individual level, spending some time with an android named Kara. See, in the future world the game is set in, a company called CyberLife has created nearly perfect recreations of human beings, with the intelligence and processing power of a supercomputer built into each one. They're nearly indistinguishable from their creators, save some internal parts and oil and a small LED on their right temple. Kara is one of these androids, built and sold to be a live-in maid and nanny. She was purchased at some point by a man named Todd to look after his home and daughter, but we don't meet her there initially, as she's being picked up from one of the CyberLife stores following some repair work. But androids aren't all they're cracked up to be, as we see in the world around us through the opening credits that they seem to have displaced a lot of workers, and the public sentiment towards them seems to be generally not great. And this is the first piece that we can pick apart, as it's even relevant in our world through the increased use of AI and machines in workplaces around the world. Often, those machines, or in this case androids, get the bulk of the hate for taking jobs away from humans who need the work to pay bills and feed themselves and their families. We can see the impact of things like automation on local scales most of all, where companies laying off large numbers of workers can hurt small-town economies in the worst way. Throughout history, especially since the Industrial Revolution, we've seen ebbs and flows in the economy as companies automate, leaving employees out in the cold, only to then have those employees retrain for new jobs, move away, or lose everything before the cycle starts all over. While it's easy to blame those companies, it's also something that comes with the kind of capitalist economy that we have, and it's something that we should plan for as a society. We see in Detroit Become Human that a lot of people are unemployed, with the unemployment rate being in the upper 30s, and humans are losing their homes and having trouble feeding themselves because they can't find work anywhere. This is a systemic issue, with a failure to take care of those who need help being prevalent in the game just like in our world. It's a debate that is often had, and one we even briefly touched on in our breakdown of Red Dead Redemption 2, so I won't get too into the weeds here, but I will say that placing the blame on the androids isn't right. They didn't ask to be created or to be used in the way they've been used, and it would be very much like blaming the car for putting horses out of work. Sure, Cars made transportation easier, but they were just tools, and how we as a society chose to adopt and use them is on us, and more broadly, the companies and individuals that made that change happen. Kara's first task upon being brought into the house is to clean up a bit, and to check on Todd's daughter Alice. Most of what we have to do is mundane housework, but spending a little time with Alice rewards us with a peek into her mind through a key that she provides Kara that opens a small box on her dresser. Within that box, we can find a family photo that presumably shows Alice with her dad and mom, a 4-leaf clover, and some drawings the little girl made that give us a better picture of how Kara became broken and foreshadowing what we can expect from our new family. Alice watched Todd break Kara at some point, and from the other images, it's clear that he likely has a temper. But we don't even have to wait to see that temper in person, as we see it come out over several interactions leading up to late in the evening, when Todd throws the kitchen table across the room. This whole opening is really hard to watch, especially as someone who had to deal with something like this on a personal level growing up. Being around someone who loses their temper for seemingly no reason, who lashes out both verbally and physically, is something that no person should ever have to deal with. And candidly, as I played through this the first time, there were several emotions that washed over me, but none so heavy as the desire to save and protect Alice. She reminded me a lot of my little sister, and I wanted more than anything to do something. But as an android, Kara is programmed to follow orders without question, and was stuck on the spot that she stood in because Todd ordered her to stay. I didn't know it at first, but this is something you can overcome through a minigame where you break down the virtual wall in your programming, and as soon as I figured it out, I was upstairs confronting Todd. And as frustrating as that mechanic is, it actually hits on something that we can use as a lesson for our own lives. Sometimes we come across similar situations in life, where we become aware of something bad that is going on, but tell ourselves it's none of our business or that there's nothing we can do. In reality, just the act of speaking up or reaching out to help someone in trouble can actually wind up saving lives. Often, the situations we see in public, or that we know about with people we know personally, are much worse than we see on the surface. If someone is willing to berate or cause harm in public, what are they willing to do in the privacy of their own home? Even just letting a victim know that you are there and that they are heard can be a good first step, but it's also a scary thing. What if our actions make things worse? What if we're wrong? So many questions and so much doubt act just like the invisible barrier Kara has to break through. You might not always be able to make things better, but nothing will ever get better if you don't act at all. And Kara's action of breaking through her programming pays off as she's able to save Alice after confronting Todd, and the pair escape into the rainy night. What I didn't know at the time in my first run was how that little interaction would catch up to me later. I also didn't know, because I wasn't as thorough as I could have been, that there was a gun in Todd's room that would have been really helpful and saved me a lot of trouble. That's one of the things I found really great about this game though, and one of the reasons I'm sure I'll be playing a few more times through. The first run, with no spoilers and no idea of what to expect, really tested me when it comes to decision making. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. Kara and Alice don't have a lot of options when it comes to places to go, though a chance encounter with another android gives Kara a destination for the following day if she can just get them through the night. And in this first little excursion, Alice acts as a kind of moral compass for Kara, as she doesn't approve of some of the things that Kara can do to try and better their situation. For instance, and I'm not exactly proud of this decision, I had Alice act as a distraction so I could steal money from a gas station. At the time, I didn't know what else to do, and I knew that they would need money to survive. And that's really an important thing to look at, because through Kara and Alice we can understand how someone could be desperate enough to steal like that. If it was Kara alone, it might not be a big deal, and really wouldn't even be worth it. But throwing Alice into the mix means it's our job to feed and protect a little girl. Imagine you're in a situation like that. It might sound kind of far-fetched at first glance, but it's unfortunately not a rare occurrence in our world. A parent, usually a mother, finds herself on the run from a partner who would hurt her, and she just needs to protect herself and her children. Maybe there are programs in the area to help, but more often than not, there aren't really any easily accessible, and the programs that do exist are underfunded. Kara and Alice could very easily be a mother and daughter in need of help. And it's made even worse as Kara is an android and is seen as inferior to humans. She definitely can't get help anywhere because she would be seen as malfunctioning when Todd showed up and reported that she just went crazy, likely eventually replacing her with a new model. But stealing the money was the only thing I would do wrong after being scolded by Alice. She called me out for breaking her trust, breaking my heart and pushing me to make better decisions in the future. But those better decisions would mean sleeping in an abandoned car instead of a comfy motel, and things didn't get much better with the sunrise. Kara was able to get a change of clothes, cut her hair, and remove her LED, helping her to blend in a lot better. But Todd reported the incident to the police, and they were swarming the area as Kara and Alice worked to escape. It wasn't easy getting away from the cops, with the world's most advanced game of Frogger being required to cross a major highway in the process. But before long, the pair were once again in the wind and heading toward possible help. I assumed that they were making a detour at a haunted house as they approached the address the android from before had provided. But that guess faded quickly as they knocked and rang the doorbell at the spookiest house on Elm Street. The guy that answered the door didn't exactly instill confidence in his ability to help, and when I found out his name was Zlatko, I wanted to turn around and run as far away from that place as possible. I don't mean to come off as mean to anyone named Zlatko, but it just sounds like the name that you would read in the newspaper as someone responsible for a string of unsolved homicides. He claims that he helps androids on a regular basis, and he even has one that acts as a servant of sorts, Luther. If I'm being completely honest, Luther is probably my favorite character in the game, and not just because he reminds me so much of John Coffey from the Green Mile. He winds up being a protector for Alice and Kara, but not before we learn that Zlatko is actually responsible for a string of unsolved homicides. Well, sort of. He takes androids, wipes their memories, and then either resells them or uses them for his own personal entertainment. The dude has an android polar bear and a ton of really messed up androids in the basement. Now that I think of it, he is actually a lot like the adult version of Sid from Toy Story, though a lot more twisted. Zlatko hooked Kara up to a machine that he said would turn off her tracker, but it actually wiped her memory because I had no idea how I was supposed to get free. Thankfully, Zlatko is just about as good at making memory wipe machines as he likely is at being around other humans, and Kara was able to get her memory back with just a couple of minor interactions. Remembering who Alice is and escaping is only half the battle, however, as Zlatko catches up with the newly reunited pair in the backyard and threatens them the only way he knows how, with a loaded shotgun. That might have worked, but for the intervention of Luther, who was inspired by the way Alice stood up for Kara and stayed at her side even in the face of danger. Zlatko tries to threaten Luther, but he is no match for the friendly giant and soon finds himself with no gun and surrounded by the creations he once kept hidden in the dark basement. Zlatko, barely stands a chance as his monstrosities surround him and he falls victim to his hubris. Luther offers to help Kara get Alice someplace safe, and the newly formed trio sets off into the night in search of safety and warmth. But those things will be harder to find than they planned, as a massive snowstorm kicks up in the subsequent hours and they find themselves stranded on the side of the road when their car breaks down. A short walk through the snow brings them to an abandoned theme park, and they find brief respite in an old gift shop. And we're seeing as they go how the impact of Kara's actions is snowballing like the weather. She's not only managed to save Alice from a bad situation, but she's now managed to help Luther as well as an untold number of androids in the future through a series of small but powerful actions. But we should also take a moment to look deeper at what Zlatko was doing, as there is an argument to be made that he wasn't doing anything wrong. See, androids are considered property, nothing more than machines, and he hasn't been stealing them so far as we know. Instead, he's been using a series of well-placed androids to lead those who have become deviant, to his house to be reprogrammed or experimented on. To most people, what he is doing would be no different than someone who is fixing up or toying around with vintage cars. The difference, of course, is that the androids have shown a propensity to seek freedom and have exhibited what we would consider in humans to be free will. The subject of whether androids deserve rights and equal treatment has been talked about in a previous video here on the channel. But whether you think Zlatko is doing something acceptable or not would have to hinge on where you stand on that topic. If you see him as a sick monster, you likely align with the idea that androids deserve equal treatment with humans. But there is another element to unpack, because even if you think that what he's doing is okay because they are, after all, just machines, they are machines designed to look and act like real humans. And that begs the question, what is the next step for him? We know that some kinds of criminals in society work their way up to crimes by starting with smaller, more acceptable things. For instance, someone might start off as a peeping Tom and escalate to more intrusive crimes. Someone like Zlatko could start with doing these horrific experiments on androids, but escalate when the androids are no longer enough to satisfy his desires. He could be using them as practice for other things down the road as well, something he's already thought about but doesn't have the will to pull off just yet. Either way, what he's doing with the androids should be considered a red flag at a minimum, and the fact that Kara was able to stop him may well be the biggest positive impact she'll individually have throughout the course of the game. Back in the gift shop, Kara, Luther, and Alice are surprised by a group of androids named Jerry that wind up making the night a little brighter with the magic of a carousel. It's one of the nicer moments in the story and probably one of my favorite interactions in the game. As sweet as it is, it can only last a short while, and the morning light finds the trio at the home of Rose Chapman, a woman with a heart of gold. She's been helping androids along the way as they head for Canada, and despite the personal risk to herself as the law has been cracking down on deviants, she offers to help Kara, Alice, and Luther get to the Great North. There is one thing to deal with and discuss here, because as Rose is working to secure information about passage for Kara and the group, a police officer stops by the house searching for androids. Now, for starters, these kinds of door-to-door searches for any group would be illegal without a warrant, thanks to the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Law enforcement needs to have probable cause to enter a residence without the homeowner's approval, and I really wish the devs would have given us the option to refuse entry to the officer on that ground alone. With that, however, the way the officer walks around, looking for a reason, is the very reason why people don't trust law enforcement to begin with. He isn't looking to help people in need, he's looking for some entry point that will allow him to bring more officers back to tear the house apart. And things like that should never happen to anyone. No one should have to worry that their door could be busted open at any time, with authorities piling in to search for whatever they deem as some kind of threat. That officer should have been turned away and should have gone about his business elsewhere. In reality, he shouldn't have been out searching for possible deviants in the first place, as that is such a generic thing to look for. Imagine a scenario where police are going door to door searching for possible dangerous things, a term as generic as possible deviants. They could label anything as possibly dangerous, just like the officer in Detroit could label any android as possibly deviant. What if someone in the neighborhood did have an android? What if that android wasn't deviant, but the officer decided it looked like it might be? Should he be allowed to just attack or call in backup to have the android disposed of? The Fourth Amendment protects the innocent and keeps people safe from government overreach in their personal spaces. And we all owe it to ourselves to become familiar with that and our other rights so we don't wind up in a situation like Kara, Luther, and Alice. Thankfully, Kara is able to talk her way out of potential trouble, and Rose soon returns with a plan to leave that evening. As they make their way to the escape point, we can see more rights violations in action as police are shooting androids deemed as deviant. It's clear that tensions have escalated, and the trio doesn't have much time to escape if they want to make it out before the oil in the pan catches fire. Rose drops them off a couple of blocks away from an old freighter, where she says they can find help in a place called Jericho. And she gives them some money and directions to a safe house in Canada before they part ways with her. The freighter is a temporary refuge for deviants that are searching for safety, and Kara is able to secure passports that will help her, Alice, and Luther get out of Detroit before everything comes crashing down. There are a couple of big points here to focus on, but one is way more significant than the other. The smaller obstacle is an attack on the ship by authorities that winds up sending Kara and Alice running for safety somewhere else, while Luther is left behind to a temporarily unknown fate. This would normally be a big deal, as the walls on androids close in more and more, but it is overshadowed by a piece of truly awful writing. The story in Detroit Become Human is generally well written, despite some cliches and overdone allegory. But there is one point that just should not exist in the context of the story. While in Jericho, Kara finds out that Alice is an android child model and not a real human child. This comes as a shock to her and is supposed to shock the player as well, but it is foreshadowed several times in the game and ultimately has no bearing on the story overall, with one exception. If a player had been playing as Kara and only wanting to save Alice because they thought she was a human, this twist could cause them to lose interest in saving her. If they didn't care about androids in general and thought they should all be destroyed, finding out Alice was an android could cause them to sabotage the rescue attempt and give up on the story. Others, however, would likely not care one way or the other whether she was a human or android and would be just as willing to save her either way. So, in the end, the revelation comes across as nothing more than the writers trying to bring some shock value to the game that isn't needed. In my eyes, her being an android doesn't change anything. We can still see how Kara could be a mother figure, and Alice herself doesn't seem to realize that she isn't human any more than Kara did. It's honestly the worst moment in the story for me, but I'm willing to overlook it to open another can of worms on the same path. The idea that cyberlife is making android children is disturbing to say the least. The most obvious situation where these android models would make sense, and even be slightly justified, would be to give a child to someone who isn't able to have their own but wants a child to love. Never mind the countless children who need loving families that are stuck in the foster care system, cyberlife could say that there is a market and sell these lifelike kids in droves. Of course, that isn't really the use case that I think would wind up being the driver in the market for this lineup of androids, though. For one, you'd have the rich family that wants to show off their children without actually having to have real children. These would be the stereotypical, soulless, wealthy individuals who are just looking for ways to show off to their friends and would treat the android kid just like they would treat their own flesh and blood children, with indifference and neglect. You would also, inevitably, have consumers who would use the android children for child labor, much like in the old days where children were used because they were smaller and could fit into tight spaces that adults couldn't, as well as using them to manipulate and deceive others through spy programs and other nefarious acts. But the real core market would be much darker, and would be along the lines of Zlatko from earlier. I won't go into details here, but I'm sure you can imagine what might happen when some adults in society are able to purchase what amounts to a child that isn't seen by society as a child. For all intents, the android would look and act like a child, and to say that selling devices like that would be unethical is an understatement. After the events on the freighter, Kara and Alice regroup with the group run by an android named Marcus before making their way to the bus station. They only have a short time before the final bus for the border leaves, so they have to hurry. Along the way, they run into Luther, who escaped the ship but is on the verge of being destroyed by police in the curfewed streets. They're able to free Luther and sneak away, but soon find themselves face to face with a checkpoint that could spell disaster if they don't handle it right. In many ways, this is an unrecognizable city for most of us. They are cracking down on supposedly dangerous android deviants while forcing humans to stay inside and live under a curfew and checkpoints where you have to prove you belong. It's a subject we'll be expanding on in a future video, especially when we get to Marcus's story, but it's something worth noting here because we've seen some major changes in a short period of time. Early in the game, only a couple of days before Alice, Kara, and Luther find themselves being hunted, the Detroit we see almost looks like a city we'd see in the real world, though with more advanced tech. People and androids are free to come and go as they please, and despite some ongoing social issues, there isn't much police or government presence to worry about. In a matter of days, the government has decided there's a massive threat and locked everything down. They've made it almost impossible to move anywhere in the city without some major concessions, and they're violating the 4th and 14th Amendments, and possibly others, in the process. This is all being done under the guise of protecting the public, but from Kara's perspective, we've not seen any reason the public would need to be protected from androids. If anything, we've seen the exact opposite. The checkpoint is only a slowdown, however, and the trio is able to make it to the bus station without much more trouble. It's at this point, though, that our choices come back to bite us. Kara, Alice, and Luther run into Todd. He's angry and starts calling for security, revealing that the group is made up of androids to the officers at the terminal. Luther is killed while Kara and Alice run for safety, with the friendly face of Rose and her son Adam coming in to help. After a short car ride and a teary goodbye, Kara and Alice climb into a boat to cross the river into Canada. But things don't go as planned, and Alice is shot by a patrol boat on the icy river before they can make it to freedom. There's only a short time to act, and as hard as she tries, Kara is unable to save the girl, making it to shore just in time to see Alice shut down. But that doesn't have to be the outcome. Every choice has a ripple effect, and we can go back in time and make some different choices and see how small changes in our actions can have a big impact. We're back in the house with Todd, on the night where everything went wrong. But this time, Kara took a few extra moments to clean and discovered a secret in the bedside table. Instead of just running away with Alice, Kara makes sure that Todd can never hurt her or anyone else ever again, before disappearing into the night. There are a few other minor changes over the course of the story, but Kara, Alice, and Luther are able to make it back to the bus station, this time without needing to worry about a confrontation with Todd. But there is still an obstacle or two to overcome, as they find out the buses are full and only accepting passengers who already have a ticket. This is a problem, because while they have passports, they weren't able to secure tickets before now. But fortune finally shines on them, in the form of a family in a hurry that drops their tickets on the ground right at Kara's feet. And now we have a decision to make. Do we return the tickets or keep them for ourselves? On the one hand, the family seems pretty distraught about losing their tickets, and they have a baby with them that they seem worried about. They presumably bought the tickets themselves, and keeping them would be stealing, meaning the action is legally wrong. But what about morally and ethically? The family is fleeing Detroit because of the fear officials have drummed up about the deviants. And as far as we know, they are human and really don't have anything to fear. Androids haven't attacked or killed anyone on a large scale, and they've only asked for freedom, not demanded to have humans bow down or be killed. Kara, Luther, and Alice, on the other hand, are at risk of losing their lives if they stay in the city, as officials are hunting down and destroying androids. Keeping the tickets and getting on the bus gives them a fighting chance to live, while the family will have a good chance to survive whether or not they leave Detroit. This is one of those times that I think most people in Kara's position would act the same way and keep the tickets. Put yourself in her shoes for a minute, where your very life is at stake, and getting on that bus could mean the difference between seeing another sunrise or being executed. She has to do what's best for herself, Luther, and Alice. Getting on the bus is just the first step, though, as they soon find themselves in another difficult spot as authorities at the border station are checking temperatures as a way to weed out androids. There are several options to get through, but ultimately the thing that helps them the most is some good old-fashioned empathy. The official at the counter recognizes their plight as something worth risking everything for, and allows them through, setting up the discussion for next week as our group makes their way into the land of maple syrup and hockey. Kara fought hard on an individual level, which is all some of us can do when things get hard. History often remembers the larger-than-life figures like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, and many others. But the real change in society is driven by those who will be long forgotten when the ink dries on the history books. It's people like Kara, Luther, Rose, the man at the border checkpoint, and others that build the framework of a better world when all hope seems lost. That's the biggest lesson we can take away from Kara's story. We don't need to lead an army or change the world to have an impact. We only need to be willing to do the right thing in the face of adversity and difficult times. Standing up for your neighbor, being there for the person who's lost everything, reaching out with a helping hand instead of raising a fist, it's the little actions that change the world and make it better. But there is still a place for leaders when it comes to making positive change in the world, and next week we'll examine how the actions of one person can shape the world and how the right thing to do isn't always the thing that makes the most sense in the moment. What choices did you make as Kara? Did you manage to make it safely to Canada, or did you run into something you couldn't overcome along the way? Hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on the new philosophy and ethics in games videos I release every Thursday here on Lost in Games. If you want to help me keep making things like this and analyzing even more games in the future, join as a channel member on YouTube or head over and check out Patreon. Both things help immensely and get you early access to videos, your name on the screen, behind the scenes content, and more. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.